I always enjoy the opportunities to meet new people and to help inject some inspiring conversation into the lives of our audience. Whether you're watching the video version of this conversation or listening to us on the radio or via podcast, the story of Kirk McCarley is a good one, and it's an inspiring one. And it's, by the way, one that also contains some common areas of interest because he's got a bit of a background in sports. College football and basketball. And Kirk, you and I are talking just a couple of days after my Michigan Wolverines forgot how to shoot for the final 5 minutes of an Elite Eight game. So I'm still a little bit sore, even though a lot of people will hear our conversation well after that's all done. It's still fresh on my mind, but thank you for being part of our conversation today. How are you?
I'm well, and thank you so much for having me. And I'm sorry about your Big Blue.
They just forgot how to play for about 5 minutes. What is the general background of Kirk McCarley? Where did you get started in what you now do as a certified professional coach?
Well, a little bit about me, first of all, Bill. Christ follower, husband, father, sports fanatic, former HR director, and that's kind of how coaching entered into the equation. I've been in HR or had been in HR for 35 years, and at the age of 57, I reached a crossroads of I want to see what the Lord has in store for me next. I don't have any notions or ideas of retirement per se, but I want to transition into something else. So at that point in time, I hired a coach myself and discussed several different occupations, pathways that could be taken. I'd always thought about maybe the ministry, talked about teaching a little bit, talked about maybe being a counselor. And through work with him, there was a breakthrough moment, an aha, where I pointed my finger, looked him in the eye, and said, I want to do what you do, which is coaching. So at that point in time, I made an assessment. What do I need to do to get into coaching? And school training was part of the equation. And fortunately for me, having been in HR, it was somewhat of a natural transition for me, first of all, and it made sense. But a lot of the judgmental factors that had been so much a part of my career up to that point in terms of assessing people were gone. That was out the window. So I went to school, so to speak, uh, got my certification at that time, later got accreditation from the International Coaching Federation, and embarked upon a mission of coaching. One of the things I learned early on with having a business is, what is your niche going to be? And I thought about wellness at first, and I thought about some other things, but have settled on career and life coaching. And I've got a target market, an audience, and that is people like myself, maybe perhaps like you, who have reached a capstone in their career or want to reach that and start to ask themselves, what is my legacy going to be? What's my imprint on this world going to be? So I have that niche. I also work with people who are career starters who have much the same interest, seeking out what they want to do with their life. Who are the clients that I have? A few of those, but mostly everything in between.
Yeah, well, that's usually how it works out when especially when you're establishing yourself into a new area of expertise. And I'm also aware of the reality that a good number of our audience members, when they hear the concept of coaching and they're picturing a guy with a clipboard, a whistle, and telling somebody to drop and give me 25 kind of a thing. The actual interaction that you would have with a coaching client, with somebody who is perhaps during the pandemic was displaced from their job. Maybe they have entered into the need for a new career through no desire of their own. And those can be kind of jarring transitions to make. I'm wondering if you've run into that sort of thing here just in the last few months, as so much of what we thought was safe, stable, and secure has been thrown into the spin cycle a bit.
Yeah, no doubt about it, Bill. Our world has changed over the last 13 months. And fortunately, and I'm just amazed that our scientists have come up in less than a year's time with an antidote for what is going to help us get through. But having said that, we're not going to go back, I don't believe, to exactly 2019. It's going to look a little bit different. And I think opportunity exists for those who can figure out what this new normal is going to be to really thrive. But you're absolutely right. People during this period of time have been at a minimum inconvenienced and in many cases overwhelmed. They've lost jobs, they've lost careers, things are not the way they've been. And what do I do now? Where do I go? And 2020 was actually an extremely good year for me because of people like that in not only career, but in life areas. What's next? How are we going to respond to it?
Yeah. You go by the title of the seed sower coach, the seed sower coach. What does that mean?
There's a couple of plays on that, Bill. One, I'm a gardener, and I've been frustrated with these sandy soils in Northwest Florida, but I'm working to overcome that. But I've always liked seeing uh, plant life grow. But the other side of that comes from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 8, verse 15, where the seed on good soil stands for those with a noble and a good heart who hear the word, retain it, and by persevering produce a good crop. For my clients, that's what I aim to do. I see them as seeds. There's a lot of potential that's there, and it's hidden at this point in time. It may be as rough or rugged metaphorically as a seed. How is this going to grow into something of abundance and produce for others? So I try to plant the seeds with those individuals and nourish them, provide them with the support and the encouragement so that they can grow and flourish and share whatever it is that they need to share with others.
Yeah, I love that concept. And I was also thinking about the question that many are asked, maybe by a spouse or by a friend. Hey, how's work going? Or what'd you do today? Or how do you define a successful day? In what I do in the world of broadcasting and consulting, it's a very difficult explanation because some days, when you lay your head on the pillow at night that you had a really good day, that you made a difference, that you told a story effectively, as may be the case in my world. What's a really good day at the Seed Sower Coach headquarters?
The world headquarters here
Yeah.
in, pardon me, Santa Rosa Beach, Florida, an aha moment with a person, a sacred intersection with someone who is different from me, who I maybe have not encountered before. I think of not so much a coaching client, but I'm also a cyclist, and I completed a bike ride in Georgia last weekend. And I'm very proud of myself. It was a century ride, and it was my 18th career century ride. So at 64, I'm feeling pretty good about that. And I met a person who is a pastor. He's also a cyclist. And we were talking about our century rides. And he shared that, yeah, I rode with somebody today that completed his fifth ride.
Now you have to define century ride for us.
That's 100 miles.
That's what I
So
thought that was. Yeah, that sounds pretty daunting.
you've got a sore bum at the end of it at a minimum, that's for sure.
I would think.
But this guy, he shared the story of the guy who had completed 5 century rides that week. And so we're always humbled in life. And so I'm kind of like, oh, and so there's a story to tell that comes out of that. And that's rich. And that's what I enjoy, is being able to listen to people tell their stories. And that's a successful day.
Yeah.
I like to label him a good friend of mine, Steve Adams. He wrote a book about sacred intersections. That's a sacred intersection. And
Yeah,
what
just
makes life worth it.
a few weeks ago on this program, we featured Greg Nance, a young man who ran 7 marathons in 7 days on 7 different continents. Okay, so for all of those wonderfully dedicated runners out there who are making their little milestones along the way, sometimes when you hear a story like Greg Nance's, you could be discouraged, or you could realize that the only way to get anywhere close to that realm is by making small incremental steps in your own world, right? You're not going to just go, "Hey, I'm going to go do exactly what he did and tomorrow go try and book flights to 7 different continents and think you're going to pull this off." And I say that because I think that from a coaching standpoint, the concept of baby steps, the concept of making progress in ways that may not be colossal, but it might be incremental steps, seems like seems like a much more realistic strategy for reaching whatever the goal is, whether it's professionally or personally, or maybe it's a health related goal. Uh, what do you do with that concept where somebody says, my ultimate goal in this coaching relationship is quite lofty? Then you have to lay out a strategy that gets them there one small step at a time, right?
Yeah, and often it's just as simple as making that bed every morning. Uh, I have a coach myself, and he shared a story with me. He's also a therapist and has dealt with people who are severely depressed, suffer with PTSD, and it becomes so much a small baby step to take that it's try to smile once today. And the next time we get together, we'll try to get you to smile twice in that day. That's progress. And even though that seems very simplistic, for some people, that is a huge burden to
Wow.
carry. And so you have to meet the client where they are at that point in time. And sometimes it's just presenteeism as a coach that is so important. Hey, somebody listened to me today. They cared about me. They get me. And it's as simple as that, as opposed to the lofty goals of, I want to get a new executive level job that pays me 25% more than what I'm getting right now.
Hmm. Our guest here on The Big Impact is Kirk McCarley. He is the Seed Sower coach, and along with personal and professional coaching that he brings to the table, Kirk's got quite a background in working on behalf of some of the big broadcast organizations like ESPN as part of the production crews for college football and basketball. And I'm very interested in that, of course, because I used to broadcast as a color commentator college football on the radio, and always thought, someday I'll be that guy in the booth on ESPN. And as it turns out, I did not have a coaching resume for a lot of years, which seems to often lead into that setting. But take us into your background in the production world and what it's taught you.
Well, let me give a little bit background story of how I got into it. First of all, I'm what they call a talent statistician, which my role and my job is to pass along notes and observations to the talent during the course of the game. That's the play by play announcer, color analyst, to illuminate their impressions of the game and to basically help them to appear and look even smarter than they are. And these are some pretty brilliant people that I'm having the opportunity to work with. When I was about 9 or 10 years old, I was very unathletic, and a sacred intersection kid got me involved in Pee Wee League basketball, and I discovered a love and a passion and developed myself into a decent athlete. But I always had a mathematical mind, Bill, and one of the things I realized was a major part of sports were statistics. In basketball, how many points did a guy average per game and what did that mean? And in baseball, how many hits did he get out of how many at bats? Well, in that day and age, sports pages were pretty unsophisticated compared to how they are now. There weren't calculators other than what accountants use to add things up, counting machines. The Texas Instrument calculator with those red digital numbers had not yet appeared on the scene yet. So my fascination became mental. If I knew a player went 1 for 4 batting average, I knew he was hitting 250. I knew the next time if he went 2 for 4, he was at 375. When it got a little bit more complex than that, it was longhand division, which I started memorizing. And so by the time I got into high school, I could have conversations going to a ball game, and I'd see a guy come up to the plate, and he was 12 of 24. I knew if he got a hit, he was going to go to 520. If he missed, he was going to go down to 480. So memorization
Yeah.
came into play.
You were a spreadsheet before there were spreadsheets.
I guess, as I've been called sometimes the human computer, I don't know if that's good or bad, but it is what it is. On into college, I roomed with a guy who was a broadcast communications major, another guy who was an IT guy, had that middle mind, and we were the guys that would watch the game of the week and comment on the comments. And I would bring statistical analysis to that. And people would come in and out of the apartment perplexed. What are you guys doing? Go get a life. This is ridiculous. Well, my broadcast communications friend embarked on a very successful career in broadcasting. Along the way, he was doing college football. He asked me to assist him with that. I did. It paid for a few things, and we embarked or transitioned over to ESPN in 1996. He has since moved on to other things, but I continued to do that. And so it's been 25 years with the Bristol Giant now, so to speak, in college football, college basketball, and now this year, college baseball and softball on top of that. So, as a matter of fact, before we came on the air, I was doing some prep work for a college softball game this afternoon in Tallahassee, which, by the way, is going to be done remotely. And that's a whole new chapter in broadcasting.
Yeah, it's kind of a peek behind the scenes for our audience. Just so you all know, the broadcast networks, when they can, and I would say when, because if it's a championship game to finish a season, they'll most likely have the broadcast crew on site, and they'll have them in some quarantine plexiglass bubble that whatever, that's what they're doing. So but if it's a game that's not at that level, quite often now the broadcasters are either in a studio somewhere, or in the case of like the well-known Dick Vitale, I think he's at home, and they'll build a studio in their home and try to work out the communication so that there's no delay, so that there's no buffering like you sometimes hear on Zoom where somebody sounds like a robot for a second or two. They work it out with some good technology, but the reality is the announcers are not in the arena. They're not at the stadium. They may have a few more monitors to watch action than we do at home watching on one screen. But Kirk, as you're part of those teams, you still got to get them the information that they need as if they were and as if you were at the game. So how do you work that part of it? How do you give them tidbits about what's unfolding when you're not there either?
Zoom chat is a wonderful device on Zoom, and that's how notes are passed around, which used to be passed on manually on, in my case, a 3x5 card. But it's amazing how all this has been cobbled together, and it comes across to the viewer or the listener rather seamlessly. But there's a lot that needs to go into it. Our communications are through Zoom, and so I'll make a connection with the production truck, which will be in Tallahassee this afternoon. my play-by-play announcer, who is usually in Cleveland, a color analyst who she may be anywhere, and another component called live stat broadcast, which I can go to the home team's website, pick that up, and see statistical information passed along in real time. I'm also keeping score at home, and I've got another device called the Unity app, which is on the iPhone, which replaces the headset we formerly used, where I can talk to talent, I can talk to the production truck, the producer, the director, and have communications take place like that. Now,
That's amazing,
the
by the way.
biggest, it is the challenging part of it becomes for me at this time of year in Northwest Florida. It's spring break, and before we came on the air, we were talking about the fragility of internet connection. Should you have disruption and go down, you got your knickers in a knot, so to speak.
Yeah, let
And
me
it
let
was
me let me paint that picture for our audience just a little bit. What Kirk's referring to is his connection to the ESPN production team is reliant upon a reliable internet connection. Meanwhile, his town in Northwest Florida is flooded with spring breakers. And as we all know these days, instead of going on spring break and just enjoying the beach and the weather, everybody still has their faces in their screens, which means all those screens are still connected to the internet, which means they're all sharing the same resource. And there are times when there will be there will be none left over for the seed sower coach. Let's put it that way.
That's right. And sometimes I lag a little bit behind the action that's taking place on the field. But I've got stat broadcast. And it was interesting because I had an event uh, a few weeks ago. It was basketball, where my uh, live broadcast was about 15 seconds behind what was happening with the game. I had a stat broadcast, and it was Iowa State and Baylor playing in Waco. And I could see that Iowa State was getting ready to hit a 3-point shot. I just hadn't seen it yet, but I saw it statistically.
You're
Before
predicting the future
the
now.
in the future. You get some anomalies like that.
Yeah.
Uh, had a game in Arkansas from home a couple of weeks ago, basketball, where our play-by-play announcer lost his connection during the course of the game, and he was out for 7 minutes of action time through halftime and into the very first portion of the second half. The color analysts did an admirable job of picking that up and doing play by play. So we all improvise a lot.
Well, it's obviously it's a strange time. I would make the recommendation to the powers that be at ESPN or wherever they are that you can go ahead and bring these people to the stadiums. There's small enough crowds that you can find space to sit them out somewhere. I'll tell you, Kirk, when I was back starting in broadcasting a million years ago, I had hair. One of the first things I did was high school broadcast of all the sports for a particular high school in my region that could go door to door to every business in the area. And they sold out all their sponsorships. Nobody was going to say no. And so here comes little Billy to do these broadcasts. I was equipped with, in some cases, a very now ancient radio setup called a Marty device. But after that, they equipped me with a newfangled technology called a cellular telephone. And I had this bag phone, which had its own battery and it had a lighter plug in and all these things. And I would, in some cases, in a school setting where there's no press box and on an away game, I would sit in the stands and broadcast a game. And in some cases, without a program, I'd have no idea who these kids were on the other team because they didn't, for a baseball game, for instance, they didn't publish a program because there's 8 people there. So I'm just calling, here's number 13 at the plate. And it's a small enough setting where the umpire can hear you. I mean, it's really awkward stuff. And I think about all these things going way back throughout, at least for my career. And now I realize that when you get to the point where ESPN puts you on, and I don't care, by the way, if it's softball, it's still a pretty big gig for the people who are calling the game. It's a national broadcast.
Mhm.
And the sometimes the decision making of broadcast management can be, hey, why don't we lean on this pandemic thing a little bit to save some money? And instead of sending the crew, which would cost us flights, hotels, meals, and that kind of thing, we'll just have them do it from home. And if it collapses, well, that's on them. They're just going to have to make it sound good. And I'm hoping we're past those days soon, because you can tell as a viewer when they are at the site of the competition versus when they are at home. Our conversation continues with Kirk McCarley. He is the seed sower coach, and we're glad to have him here on the Big Impact. Kirk, during this home stretch of our conversation, I really want to focus our attention in on some practical steps that you as a coach would recommend to our audience members who are contemplating maybe a career change, or maybe maybe just trying to find some happiness and some contentment in what they're doing. Maybe they're working towards some form of retirement, or maybe, as we talked about at the beginning of our conversation, maybe they've been thrust into a situation they never saw coming because of economic pressures brought about by COVID. Um, so where do you want to start? What would be your top three starting point tips for somebody who is just feeling really uneasy about where they are in life?
Speaking first of all, I think from a faith perspective, um, and regardless of where a person is on their faith walk and what they feel about a higher power being at work in their lives, I find that sometimes in these frustrating, difficult, dark periods, like so many of us have been in, that's when we grow closest to our faith. And looking at the opportunity, that quiet moment, how is God or whoever I believe this higher power to be in my life working with me right now? I remember I was in a rough patch of my own, and this was years ago, and talked to an individual about I just seem so lonely, so lost. Um, but I'm very close to God right now. And his response to me was, God's got you exactly where he wants you to be right now. And so, number one, I start from a faith perspective on that. And secondly, look at look at opportunity. Uh, Looking from a historical standpoint, I go back to the Dark Ages, which were horrible. Kind of ends on the Black Plague. Bubbling beneath the surface during that period of time were artists, scientists, physicists, writers who helped birth a Renaissance period that came right after that, after a horrible period of time, particularly in Europe. Same thing, the Great Depression, World War II, more modern times. Horrible time in American history, but Alan Turing is working on counting machines and computers. There are blues players that are playing the blues, and there was a lot to be blue about, that beget rock and roll music that comes into play in the 50s. Television as a technology comes on the scene. So oftentimes in difficult periods, that's when the greatest amount of creativity is going to launch. And I think third, each of us have within ourselves creativity, which is unharnessed, unleashed at that point in time. It's a matter, and this is where a coach can help, of asking the right questions and believing that that individual has the answer for where it is they want to go in career, in life, in whatever their endeavor may be. And so those would be maybe not so much words of advice, but contemplations,
Yeah.
three of them that I would offer the listener.
Yeah, I like that. And I'm reminded of programs like Shark Tank, for instance. That show's not going to stick around for, I don't know, 12 years if we as a people didn't take an interest in seeing ideas come to reality. and seeing people that that are not famous, that don't have some well-heeled backing behind them, that for years toiled in their basement or their garage to come up with something that they bravely then introduced to a national audience and to the investors on the Shark Tank. I can remember a couple of years ago, there was a very sweet couple from the South, I think Texas, but I could be wrong on that. And she was quite short. She was under 5 feet tall. And they needed to find a way for them, because they traveled a lot, to put items on the top of their pickup truck. And she couldn't reach up there. So they invented a very simple, about the size of a horseshoe, a little hook that would slide into the floorboard of any truck on the planet, and it would allow her to step up on it. It might even have been called Step Up. I can't remember. Anyways, it was not electronic. There was no app. There was no nothing. There was no circuit board. It was literally the same level of sophisticated design as a horseshoe, but with a little wider platform for your foot. And long story short, by the end of it, four of the sharks had declined the opportunity to invest. And one of them said, you came here asking for X number of dollars for 20% of this idea. And he said, I'd like to offer $3 million for 100% of the idea. I'd like to buy this from you, and I'm going to take it to every automobile manufacturer on the planet, and they're going to do a licensing. Anyways, this couple came out of there with this incredible life-changing experience because they did something that they didn't think they knew how to do. They invented something. They made it work. They somehow found the resources. They found the expertise. They had the idea on paper. They found somebody to make it for them, refine it for them, patent it, and do all those things. And in the end, they had this life-changing experience. And I point that out, Kirk, because they did the simple. They did the simple. They took action steps for their vision. And I think that there are so many instances in our culture where people, brilliant people with great ideas, don't do anything with them and continue in this state of discontent because they're always asking, well, what if I did? What if I should have just done it? What if I did? Why didn't I do that? And in the end, I believe, and you can certainly speak to this because you're the professional coach. I'm just a boy who talks all the time. In the end, I really think that there's a great amount of encouragement, stress relief, and hopefulness connected to just taking steps to see if that idea, whatever it is, whether it's an invention or a career change, to see if it actually would work. Why are we so afraid to take the first few steps?
There's a fear of rejection that runs deep within us, and we read things that limit our beliefs, such as 9 out of 10 businesses fail over a certain period of time, or I don't want to get laughed at again or made fun of. As you were sharing your story about the couple, I was thinking of a story related to me about a security guard at a pork and beans plant in Lawrence, Kansas, I believe it was.
Is there a big security threat at the pork and beans plant?
Well, I guess there's a lot of bacon there, and
Oh, that's a fair
there's been a
point.
good run on that, but who knows?
Yeah.
Nonetheless, this guard, besides monitoring what was going on from a security basis, would arm himself with copies of the sporting news and would divulge baseball statistics, and was writing a lot of different things down and analyzing it. And people would pass by, "What are you doing?" And had stacks of paper. Just figuring some stuff out. Well, that was the birth of sabermetrics in baseball. And the person's name was Bill James.
Hmm.
He basically wrote the book. He didn't write it, but the book was about what he did on Moneyball and analytics in baseball, which has now gone into many, many other sports, just from a very humble beginning and start. So there's a guy many thought was different, a little bit weird, but he revolutionized a sport.
And we could look through history and find so many examples, whether it's in sports or in industry or whatever, of people who they didn't set out to change an industry. They set out to just kind of fulfill a passion. And one of the great tragedies, I believe, is somebody who is full of passion but does nothing with it. I guess that's why coaches like you exist, to bring that out, to encourage, maybe to scold. I don't know if you ever get to scold or not, but to somehow light the fire under the backside that says you've got too much in there to keep it to yourself. So what's it like in that fire lighting relationship? How do you do that? And how could some of our listeners benefit from just that concept of taking some steps, getting moving?
First of all, in coaching, there's a high amount of listening. And one of the things that I really enjoy with my life coaching clients as they talk to me about their spiritual walks, their wellness, their health, their financial areas, career, of course, different things like that, is listening to what it is they're saying in their own words about their present state, but also their desired state. This is where I want to go to. And so gratifying for me to produce something for them I call an affirmation statement. A number of coaches will put that together, which is basically uh, a soliloquy on what they've told me. I see this, I see that, and convincing them that this future desired state can be your present state. And there's a little bit of osmosis that takes place of, of recording this statement back to themselves, listening to it every day, reaffirming what those things are, creating new habits after 21 days of listening to that over and over again. So, in answer to your question, limiting beliefs, I can't do this, I can't do that. And there's certain things within reason. I'm not going to be a professional basketball player or anything like that.
Right, right.
But within reason, there are things that can be done. Why can't you do that? Well, I just don't think I can. Well, I want to go run a marathon. Let's walk a mile first, or
Yeah,
walk half a mile, then
yeah.
a mile, then 2 miles. You can build up to that. And momentum, it's like a snowball coming down a mountain. It gathers, it builds. And pretty soon you're getting there and you're believing in yourself and what you have the power to do.
One of the positive side effects or byproducts of this COVID era is the realization for so many people that we can connect, even though we'd prefer to do it in person. I'd much prefer to be in the room with Kirk right now. We can connect digitally. We're talking through Zoom, and I'm assuming that a lot of your coaching can take place through Zoom. It's entirely possible that some in our audience today have thought, this is the kind of encouragement and guidance that I could use. So, where is the best place, the best avenue for our audience to connect with the Seed Sower Coach?
I've got a website. It's theseedsowercoach.com. I also can be connected via email. It's Kirk, Kirk, at theseedsowercoach.com. Or the tried and true method is telephone call.
What?
Text or call me.
I've heard
Yeah.
of this before. What is this? How is this?
Well, there's a rotary dial,
Yeah.
and
Yes.
there are buttons now on a on an iPhone.
Yeah.
314-677-8779. Call or text me, Central Time Zone. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to have a preliminary conversation, no obligation, free of charge, to hear a listener's story and talk about how I might be able to help get the listener to where it is they want to be.
Yeah. I appreciate that. And I want to make sure that people understand this is different than a well-intentioned friend giving you advice. There is a professional level. There is certification. Kirk has been trained in, and there's a lot of letters and initials after the name and all that stuff that much like your doctor would have, or much like you would expect from a heart specialist, there's a lot of education and preparation that goes into this. And Kirk, I'm going to give you the final word to kind of drill home for people why it matters that if you do turn to a professional coach for your life and career, that it actually be somebody who has some training in this field.
Yeah, family and friends and relationships are wonderful, and they want the best for us, but they always have a little bit of skin in the game. Uh, my wife wants what's best for me, but she also wants what's best for her. A coach brings objectivity. I don't have a dog in the fight, so to speak. So I'm looking at things from a uh, uh, 50,000 foot level as someone is walking through a particular situation. The training that we go through to become coaches, it focuses on how we read our clients, how we listen to them, how we ask deep and probing and open ended questions. And then we follow up on those questions. So we're trained in that regard. We look at certain things in body language and inflection of voice and in tone, different things like that to pick those things up. There's preparation that goes into each coaching meeting. Last time you shared this with me, client, I'd really love to hear more about that and what you're thinking today. And when the response is given, well, tell me more about that. What we'll often hear is, if you were to be in your ideal setting, what would that look like? And it's not, very often we'll get a response, I don't know. And a coach will maybe ask the question next, if you did know, what would that look like?
Mm.
So we push for answers, we challenge, we encourage, but all the time we're very positive on building a person up and getting them to a point that exceeds what their expectations are or sometimes ever have been.